Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
Good morning and welcome to today's episode. I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and each day I invite you to join me as we reflect on a significant moment from our shared past. Today is December 27th, and we're looking back 102 years to December 27th, 1923, when three Canadian researchers, Frederick Banting, Charles Best, and James Cullop, sold the patent for insulin to the University of Toronto for $1. Not $1 million, not a percentage of future profits. $1 single dollar. Here's what fascinates me about this moment. These men had discovered how to save millions of lives. They could have become spectacularly wealthy. The pharmaceutical industry was already forming. Patents for medical discoveries were becoming gold mines, and they chose differently. When asked why, Frederick Banting reportedly said, "Insulin does not belong to me. It belongs to the world." So what led to this extraordinary decision? How did they discover insulin in the first place? And what does their choice teach us as we watch insulin prices skyrocket a century later? Let's explore this pivotal moment and discover how it continues to shape our world today. To understand the magnitude of this discovery, we need to understand what diabetes meant in the early 1920s. Diabetes mellitus, what we now call type 1 diabetes, was a death sentence, especially for children. The disease causes the body to stop producing insulin, a hormone that regulates blood sugar. Without insulin, the body can't process glucose for energy, and blood sugar rises to toxic levels. Children diagnosed with diabetes were given perhaps a year to live, maybe 2 if they were lucky. They wasted away despite eating, their bodies literally starving because they couldn't use the food they consumed. Families watched helplessly as their children grew thinner, weaker, slipped into diabetic comas, and died. The only treatment was starvation diets, eating as little as possible to keep blood sugar lower. Doctors prescribed 500 calories per day, just enough to delay death by a few months. Children were essentially starved to death slowly rather than quickly. Parents had to enforce these brutal diets, knowing they were extending suffering more than life. Here's what strikes me from the evidence. Hundreds of researchers were racing to solve this puzzle. They knew the pancreas was involved. Remove a dog's pancreas, and it developed diabetes. Put pancreatic extracts back, and symptoms improved temporarily. But nobody could isolate the substance, purify it, or make it work reliably. Children were dying by the thousands, while researchers published papers and competed for recognition. The pressure to find an answer was immense. Frederick Banting was a young Canadian surgeon with limited research experience. In October 1920, he had an idea while reading a medical journal article. What if you tied off the pancreatic ducts to let the digestive enzymes atrophy, then extracted the substance from what remained? It wasn't a completely original idea. Others had thought along similar lines, but Banting was determined. He convinced Professor John MacLeod at the University of Toronto to give him lab space and a research assistant for the summer of 1921. That assistant was Charles Best, a 22-year-old medical student who won the position by coin flip with another student. That coin toss changed medical history. Banting and Best worked through the summer of 1921 in a hot, poorly equipped lab. They removed the pancreases from dogs, tied off ducts, waited for the pancreases to atrophy, extracted the hormone from the tissue, and injected it into diabetic dogs. And it worked. The dogs' blood sugar dropped. They grew stronger. The effects were undeniable. But the extract was impure, caused terrible side effects, and couldn't be produced in quantities needed for humans. They needed help. James Cullip, a biochemist, joined the team. He developed purification methods that made the extract safe and effective. By January 1922, they were ready for human trials. On January 11, 1922, 14-year-old Leonard Thompson lay in Toronto General Hospital, dying. He weighed 65 pounds, down from a healthy weight of over 100. He drifted in and out of consciousness. His doctors gave him days, perhaps hours. His parents agreed to let Banting and Best try their experimental extract. The first injection on January 11th had a limited effect. The extract wasn't pure enough. Cullip worked frantically to improve it. On January 23rd, they tried again with the refined extract. Leonard's blood sugar dropped. He grew alert. His strength began returning. He gained weight. He lived. I always wonder what that moment felt like. For Leonard, for his parents, for the researchers. After years of watching children die, I suddenly saw one come back to life. It must have seemed like a miracle. Within months, other children followed. Kids who'd been wasting away, lying in hospital wards waiting to die, received injections and sat up. They asked for food. They wanted to play. Wards that had been filled with starving children became filled with recovering ones. Photos from the era show the transformation. Skeletal children before treatment. Healthy-looking kids weeks later. The contrast is stunning. By early 1923, insulin was being produced in larger quantities. Pharmaceutical companies saw the potential. Eli Lilly in the United States approached the Toronto team about manufacturing rights. Here's where the story gets interesting, and where the researchers faced a choice that reveals everything about their values. They could have patented insulin in their own names. Patent law allowed it. They would have become wealthy beyond imagination. Every person with diabetes in the world would need insulin for life. The royalties would have been staggering. Or they could refuse to patent it at all, put it in the public domain immediately. But this had risks. Without quality control, companies might produce inferior or dangerous versions. Patients could be harmed, so they choose to allow the university to license production to qualified manufacturers, require quality standards, and ensure insulin remains affordable and available. Any royalties would fund further diabetes research. Frederick Banting explained their reasoning. Insulin does not belong to me, it belongs to the world. He believed that profiting from a life-saving discovery would be unethical, like charging drowning people for a life preserver. Charles Best agreed. So did Cullip. They'd seen children dying, they'd brought them back to life. Making money from that seemed unconscionable. But they didn't. In 1923, the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine was awarded to Frederick Banting and John MacLeod. Notably, Charles Best and James Cullip were excluded. Banting was furious about Best's exclusion. He immediately announced he would share his prize money with Best. MacLeod, somewhat grudgingly, agreed to share his portion with Cullip. The Nobel Committee's decision remains controversial. Best had been there from the beginning, done crucial experimental work. Cullip's purification methods made human treatment possible. Why exclude them? Some historians suggest academic politics, others point to MacLeod's seniority and lab resources. Regardless, it created tensions that lasted for years. But here's what's remarkable. Despite these disputes about recognition, all four men agreed on the patent question. None of them tried to profit from insulin personally. Even in their disagreements about credit, they shared a commitment to making insulin accessible. Now here's where the story becomes painful. A century after Banting, Best, and Cullip sold their patent for $1, so insulin belongs to the world. That same insulin costs hundreds of dollars per vial in the United States. Americans with type 1 diabetes often pay $300 to $1,000 per month for insulin, despite the drug costing only a few dollars per vial to manufacture. People ration their insulins, skip doses, or die because they can't afford it. In 2017, Shane Patrick Boyle died after his GoFundMe campaign to raise money for insulin fell $50 short of his goal. He was 26 years old. In 2018, Alec Rayshon Smith died at 26 after rationing his insulin because he'd aged off his mother's insurance. His family found him dead on his apartment floor with an empty insulin pen. These aren't isolated cases. Studies suggest that 1 in 4 Americans with diabetes ration their insulin due to cost. People are dying from a treatable condition because they can't afford a drug that was given to the world for $1. How did this happen? The insulin used today isn't identical to the 1923 version. Pharmaceutical companies have made improvements, created synthetic versions, and developed better delivery mechanisms. Each modification gets a new patent, extending monopoly protections. 3 companies, Novo Nordisk, Eli Lilly, and Sanofi, control 90% of the global insulin market. They've engaged in what's called evergreening, making minor modifications to extend patent protection indefinitely. They've kept prices high through parallel pricing. If one company raises prices, others follow. Patent thickets and regulatory barriers have limited generic competition that should have driven prices down. Meanwhile, in Canada, where insulin was discovered, it costs about $30 per vial. In the UK, it's free through the National Health Service. Americans drive to Canada or Mexico to buy insulin because it's cheaper across the border than at home. The irony is devastating. The researchers who discovered insulin refused to profit from it, believing it should belong to the world. A century later, pharmaceutical companies extract billions in profits while people die from rationing. This isn't a simple story of corporate greed versus altruistic researchers, though it might seem that way. Pharmaceutical companies argue that modern insulin is genuinely improved, faster acting, longer lasting, more stable, and easier to use. Developing these improvements costs money. Patents incentivize innovation. If companies can't profit from research, they won't do it. Some health economists agree that we need pharmaceutical profits to drive innovation. The question is, how much profit is justified and at what cost to patients? But here's what troubles me. Banting, Best, and Cullip did the most challenging part, the fundamental discovery, without expecting profit. They believe basic research that saves lives should be a public good, not a wealth-generating opportunity. Modern pharmaceutical companies build on that foundation. They're making incremental improvements to a discovery that was given freely, and they're charging prices that put the medication out of reach for the people who need it. Is that innovation, or is it exploitation of monopoly power over a life-saving drug? The debate over drug pricing is complex, but insulin's history offers moral clarity. The people who actually discovered it believed it should be shared with everyone. They made that choice deliberately, at significant personal cost. What would Banting say about insulin costing more than most people can afford? About patients dying because they ration doses? About companies extracting billions in profit from his discovery? I think we know. First, choices about values matter more than we might think. Banting, Best, and Culip could have justified taking wealth from their discovery. They chose differently, and millions of people benefited. That choice still echoes a century later. We remember them as heroes, not just because they discovered insulin, but because they gave it away. Second, we can design systems that prioritize access over profit, the University of Toronto model. Patenting for quality control while keeping prices low worked for decades. Insulin was affordable and accessible. The system didn't break because it had to. It failed because we allowed it to. Third, we're still making choices about who deserves to profit from life-saving discoveries. Every patent extension, every price increase, every regulatory barrier to generic competition is a choice. Those choices determine who lives and who dies. It means recognizing that these researchers face the same choice pharmaceutical companies face today: profit from life-saving discoveries or ensure access for those who need them. Banting, Best, and Culip chose access. They remembered that their research was conducted at publicly funded universities, used public resources, and aimed to address a public health crisis. Today's pharmaceutical industry makes the opposite choice again and again. They've forgotten or ignored the example set by insulin's discoverers. They've decided that profit matters more than access, that shareholders matter more than patients. Remembering this history means asking, what would it look like to honor Banting's belief that insulin belongs to the world? What policies would ensure life-saving medications remain affordable? What values should guide decisions about drug pricing? These aren't just historical questions. They're happening right now in debates over insulin pricing caps, generic drug approval, patent reform, and universal health care. On December 27, 1923, 3 Canadian researchers sold the patent for insulin to the University of Toronto for $1. They could have become wealthy. They chose differently because they believed life-saving discoveries should belong to everyone. Thanks for joining me today on the Daily History Chronicle. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with someone who loves history. Tomorrow, we'll explore another fascinating moment from our shared past. Until then, I'm Richard Backus, reminding you that history isn't just about what happened. It's about what we choose to do with that knowledge.